again then guys, and welcome to a car which some of you won't be surprised is on the list, but at the same time you might be surprised by how high it is on the list. A car which I talk about a number of times whenever possible, but it doesn't come up that often because we don't tend to talk about Formula cars or Grand Prix cars that much. When I do bring them up, it tends to be the same ones that I talk about, because there are 4 or 5 Grand Prix cars in particular, and I deliberately use the term Grand Prix because it's more than just specifically F1s that I absolutely love. And the ones that I do absolutely love are always the ones which were radically different or took things to an extreme. Now, one of the ones which doesn't feature on my list is the Benetton B186, a car which I've talked about before. Still the most powerful F1 car ever built, and probably always will be. 1400 horsepower in qualifying form thanks to some incredible work with turbos and a tiny capacity BMW engine. It was not the best through corners, but untouchable on the straights. I love that. But it's not enough to get it in my top 50, especially given that, conceptually speaking, I'm actually not a fan of F1 cars. I'm a fan of specific F1 cars. Now, it may seem strange given my love for the ground effect fan system that's used in the Brabham or the Chaparral or fictionally in the Red Bull cars. Why is the Williams, this car, the FW15C, the C of course, in a very particular way is important to this one, why did I put this higher than the Brabham? Well, the reason why is because with the Brabham to me is a very similar case to the Chiazzetta V16T. I love the Chiazzetta, as I said in that episode, because of its engine, and that's predominantly it. The Brabham is a car which I have a huge amount of love for, but it's actually purely because of the fan system. If you take that away, then I have no interest in the car. I have no interest in the Brabham that came before it or after it, just that one. And that's why. Whereas with the Williams, it is different for me, because with the Williams, there is more to love. It's not just a fan car, it's so much more. Because there are many people to this day who still consider this to be the most advanced F1 car, especially for its time, ever built. 1993, I believe it was. This car in this particular form, and it has to be this particular form for me, in its test form with the C variation, and the C of course stands for the CVT gearbox, a continuously variable transmission. I've talked about it before on the channel. I believe I talked about it in my Would You Like to Be a Tuner or So You Want to Be a Tuner series. I talked about it in my Gran Turismo 7 wishlist series, I believe it was. I've talked about it in others as well. And a CVT, for those who are maybe completely unfamiliar, put as simply as possible really, is a system where instead of having multiple gears interlinked, instead of all that, which has a huge amount of wasted friction and heat and time, you have a CVT. And with a CVT, you have these 2 sets of cones with a drive belt, or more commonly a drive chain, between the 2 pairings of belts. And I'll probably put some images up in the video so you can more clearly follow it along if you are unfamiliar with it. But basically the distances between the pairs of cones relative to the individual pair can change. And that makes the distance that the chain has to travel increase on one end, increase on the other end, decrease, decrease, and in so doing changing the ratios that the car can have from its gears. But the advantage is it allows you to have, in effect, thousands of gear ratios without needing to have thousands of gears. And also, even more so, it means that you're in the right gear all the time. You never have to think, what gear do I need to be in? You never have to walk up or down through the gearbox because it's always doing it for you. And at the same time, there is zero lag. There is never any time lost through gear changes because it's so efficient. You never change gear, it's just this seamless flow up and down the gearbox. It's an incredible piece of tech. It has been used on the road. A number of cars have used it, but funnily enough, not many high-performance cars do. And one of the reasons why, in fact probably the main reason why if I'm honest, is because they're not the most reliable things in the world. The stresses involved, the wear and tear, it means that they're kind of like rotaries. They have their issues, they wear out quicker. So ultimately, for use in more powerful vehicles, it needs to be something that's probably not going to be running for very long, such as a Grand Prix car. Run it for a race, then fix it up, repair it, replace it if necessary. But beyond that, it's not going to be a car that you potter around town in every day. It's driven hard for a couple of hours, And then that's pretty much it. Now it's beyond that though with the case of this car, because that alone made it faster than everything else on the grid in qualifying. They weren't allowed to use it in the actual race though, so in the race it used a more conventional gearbox, but still, if I recall, I think it was a semi-automatic or akin to a pre-select kind of gearbox or something along those lines. But even the rest of the car was so much more advanced than anything else at the time, and many of the things which the car used back in '93 are similar to the kind of stuff which many F1 cars use now. Visually, it also has a purity to it, which I love. I like the older Grand Prix cars, which look simpler. They have simpler aero, those bigger, chunkier wheels, and just a smoother, cleaner style. They're nowhere near as aerodynamically efficient, of course, and that's why they're slower, more often than not. But still, for their time, they were the pinnacle of what could happen. And if you look at the design of this compared to the 1978 Brabham, of course, again, there's a huge leap and bound taken there. But for me, the Williams is the total package. The gearbox is definitely the centerpiece for me. But beyond that, more so than the Brabham, I really do love the whole car, the way it comes together. And also, as you heard at the start of the video, it sounds literally like nothing else. I believe no other F1 car ever sounds quite like this one does, because of the fact that it never changes gear. So in a similar way, funnily enough to a turbine engine, it's just this relentlessly building noise that just goes up through all of the ratios and then down through all of the ratios, and it sounds incredible. It sounds almost like the car's about to break all the time, like you're over revving, but it's not. It's working perfectly, and I think it was something like a second per lap quicker than everything else, and would just improve that every time. So pretty impressive. In fact, a very impressive F1 car, and for someone who doesn't like F1 cars and Grand Prix cars generally, it really does stand out a lot when cars like this come around, which is why I feature them so highly. But that's it for this pick. Of course, if you want to check out others in my top 50 absolute favourite vehicles in the world, you can check that by clicking through at the end. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.